Thanks for joining me today for this presentation on how to use OpenCorporates API. My intention is to walk you through what an API is and how to use ours for your next investigation, even if you aren't technical. Firstly, by using a browser and Excel, and then secondly, by using OpenRefine. I'm Rebecca Lee. I'm OpenCorporates Chief Impact Officer, and my role is to focus on using my subject matter expertise in investigations and anti-financial crime to maximise our public benefit mission, working with journalists and civil societies such as yourselves to find stories in our data, both to strengthen the case for open company data, but also to help uncover potential criminal behaviour. So what is OpenCorporates? Well, OpenCorporates is the largest open database of companies in the world. Today we have 192 million companies, 246 million officerships across 140 jurisdictions. Our mission is to make company data open for all and to map every legal entity from official public data in order to promote global corporate transparency. As part of this, we collect, standardise and make company data available via our website for free. We build new ways to make the data as usable as possible, whether that's via an API, bulk data, or corporate signals, which now creates events for key changes in companies such as director changes. And we work to open up company data across the world. We have over 5 million unique users who use our website per month, alongside over 400 commercial organisations who use our data at scale. And in line with our public benefit mission, we give access to the data both via the API and bulk data for free to public benefit individuals and organisations such as investigative journalists and NGOs. To give some specific examples of investigations, the Panama Papers I'm sure needs no introduction. We worked with the ICIJ to help them release a part of the 11.5 million files as open data and connect company and director names from 214,000 companies to OpenCorporates. We also saw a surge of visits. In 3 days, nearly 85 million visitors searched on our website. Global Witness undertook a year-long investigation to tell the story of Burma's jade industry, which is worth, in 2014, a staggering $31 billion, which is equivalent to half of Burma's official GDP. And they looked to understand who really benefits from it, which was in essence Burma's military elite. One important aspect of their work was data analysis using our data to understand the complex webs of companies and their ownership. Companies were being removed from the official register as their investigation took place, as well as the removal of the section of the registry covering shareholders. Therefore, historical data available via OpenCorporates was critical, and our API enabled them to build their own tools to identify linkages and relationships between individuals and companies mentioned in the report. More recently, the Anti-Corruption Data Collective, working with the Miami Herald, looked into the US government's Paycheck Protection Program, intended to be a lifeline for small businesses hit by COVID, with billions in low-interest loans offered to keep employees on payroll. Of course, there was eligibility criteria to prevent the money being claimed fraudulently. For example, companies must have been in operation on 15th of February 2020 to claim. Yet their investigation found millions of dollars went to companies which were set up after this date. OpenCorporates data was combined with the US government's publicly available data set of businesses that received loans, and using the API to filter down to a subset of companies based on their incorporation date. This helped them identify where companies had been incorporated after this date and should have been ineligible for loans. Other organisations such as Bloomberg have also used our data to look into similar investigations. Our website is where most people start, and should you be interested to know more about how to dig deeper using our website, give me a shout and I can send you a link to an additional workshop. But often we see in investigations that looking record by record can be problematic, not to mention time consuming. But why is this? Well, this chain of events I'm about to set out has been frequent in my own investigations. This isn't a real world example, and the names I've got on here are more for amusement than something that's actually in practice. Here I'm interested in one company, which has directors, a branch and a headquarters address. But once we start looking at the same information based here on other companies at that address, and other companies at that address, and other companies those directors are directors of, it can easily snowball. And the problem is, how do you do this in a structured way? So you look at each node, whether that's a company, address, or an individual, and expand that search, but do it in a way that is structured so that you can document as you go, so you don't miss anything and you can scale. But most importantly, how do you do it quickly? How do you get to leads earlier? For example, identifying the potential for some of those directors to be the same person. But what is an API? Well, one of my team the other week explained it like a waiter for data, and I like the analogy, so I'm going to run with it today. So think of an API like a waiter in a restaurant. You walk in, you get given a menu of choices, usually in a structured format. So a starter, a mains, dessert, the wine menu. The waiter takes your order, again in that structured format. And in the background, the kitchen processes your order and returns it to you, generally in a way that you'd expect. Food on a plate, drinks and glasses, etc. Now this is where the analogy breaks down, because there's usually quite a wait. But with an API, you define what data you want within a set out structure. And the API returns the data you've requested, again in a structure that has already been defined. And what are the benefits? Well, the benefits are quick and efficient access to structured data, so that you can run a repeatable process that can be scaled. So you can access a huge amount of data in a shorter period of time than you'd be able to do manually, but in a standardized format. So it allows you to work with that data quickly and easily, as it's machine readable. And you can manipulate it to loop through one response and then add another layer of calls to expand it again. For example, by taking a company director's name returned and then searching for that director again. But don't just take our word for it. The quote from David is on screen. And thanks to the Anti-Corruption Data Collective and others, we have some example code of the PPP investigation I talked about earlier. And that's held on our investigative handbook on our website, as well as others talking about investigations using the API. It's worth saying up front, what is our definition of a company? Because this can change from country to country and culture to culture. Our view is that a company is something registered by a company registry. Or put it another way, company is a legal entity which is granted extra legal protection. They can enter into contracts, they can break the law, and they can own things. Okay, let's move straight on to the demo. Our API website is api.opencorporates.com, and that's handily the first result if you type in OpenCorporates API into Google. The banner provides links to the API documentation and the OpenRefine API documentation, which we'll talk about. But you will need an API key. Historically, we have had an unauthenticated API, which provided a small amount of hits, but it's temporarily turned off as it's being inundated by a lot of Chinese bots. So click here to view open data and pricing options and click on sign up. You'll be asked to log in or to create an account. It's free, and it also gives you more advanced options for searching on our website. For you as journalists, use the public URL of the newspaper and describe the use. Make sure you do mention this presentation. Worth noting is our license does require you to attribute the use of our database in your reporting. So let's start with something very simple. Here I've got the company record of a particular company. To get to this, I just searched for Mossack Fonseca, and I chose one from Panama. And I'm going to make a couple of changes to this URL. The first is to add API dot at the front of the URL. If I run this now, I'm going to get an error because we need the API token. So I'm going to copy in an API token now. And don't worry, this isn't actually my API token. This is one particular for the demo. And I'm going to run that again. And there you can see the information that is shown on that front page as text. And you can see in here I've got lots of information about officers, the registry URL it's come from, company number, jurisdiction code, for example. Now, it's not very easy to see. The format that comes back as standard is JSON. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add an additional format request at the end. And I'm going to say, and format XML. And I'm going to do that, one, because it's a lot easier for you to see as you're looking through here if I go down. But also because Excel quite likes XML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, save as, and I'm going to save that in my downloads folder as Mossack 1. And now I'm going to open up Excel. So I've already got Excel open up here. Let's move it over. I'm going to look in my downloads. There's my Mossack 1 XML, and I'm going to open it up on the default as an XML table to start with. And I'm going to let Excel do its thing for a second. Now, Excel, when you let it work the schema out itself, will duplicate some of the company information because it creates one row per officer. So you can see the company name here each time. But if we go across, because we have multiple officers somewhere here somewhere, we have one row per officer. Now you can see you'll get a lot of additional column names like types, etc. that isn't particularly useful. But that's Excel managing it itself. So it's pretty simple that you can download this data straight into Excel to play with it. So I'm now going to show you something quite similar with the search. So this is my original search for Mossack Fonseca, and you can see that I found 51 companies. So the syntax for this is slightly different if I want to replicate the search. Again, I need to put API dot on the front of that, but I also, after companies, before the question mark, I need to add search. Then I've got my query, which is Mossack plus Fonseca, so the search terms are split with a plus. I can take the add and UTF-8 out, that's not needed. And then what I can do is I can put in my API token, and my API token here, and my and format XML, which we saw before. So you can see actually the API search term is pretty easy to build up. Search terms are just separated by that plus sign, and as you can see I've got it back in XML. So I'm going to save that again. I'm going to save. So I can now open Excel. On my search, I'm going to click as an XML table again, let it do its thing. And what you will see is that, if I go back to the search, we do have duplication on Conifer Ridge Limited before we get to some of the other search results. And that is because if I do it on here as well, Conifer Ridge has multiple previous names, and you'll see them under here as well. The great thing about Excel though is it has an XML reader similar to a pivot table. So I'm going to close that. And I'm going to open it up again, but this time using the Use XML Source task pane. I'm going to let it do its thing again. And what you can see is it creates a schema based on the XML it's read. Now I'm going to select a few fields here. So I'm going to add in the name, the company number, the jurisdiction code. I then want to add the value of the incorporation date. And let's check the value of the current status. And then what I want to do is I want to right click XML, refresh XML data, and then there you go. You get the pivot information of the specific fields that you want. Very much like you would play with a normal pivot table in Excel. There are some things to note though. If you take a look at the bottom of my search in Excel, there are only 30 results compared to the 51 that we have when we run through the website. And that's because we have a page limit. So if we look at our API response again, right at the bottom, you'll see here we have a per page limit of 30, which is the standard limit, alongside the total pages and the total count. So as API user, you can automatically increase that page parameter to 100. So if I were to do that, and per underscore page equals 100, and I'm just going to add, for clarity, and page equals 1. And if we loop down to the bottom again, you'll see here we've got our per page 1 and total pages 1, because 51 was within 100. But if we were to have a search result with more than that, then we would just change this page equals to 2. At the moment I'm getting nothing back because there's no results on that page 2. So this is pretty manual, and Excel isn't amazing for dealing with APIs, but it is helpful for your first steps when you don't have any programming language experience. And understanding and pulling out data in the XML schema, much like the pivot table, is quite easy to wrap your head around. But sometimes you have a whole list of company names and you want to quickly find a matching legal entity for each name. This is a good case for our reconciliation API, which we also call our legal entity resolution API, and using OpenRefine. So OpenRefine is a free software that allows you to work with messy data, clean it, filter it, and enrich it. In this case, I'm going to enrich it with the OpenCorporates API. So here it is, openrefine.org. It's got some great tutorials on how to use it. Start by going to download. On my machine I'm currently using, I needed the Windows kit and also to install Java. All in all, it took a few clicks and it was just as easy on my Mac. And then what I can do is access it in my browser. So you start by creating a project. And I've created a really simple list of 10 companies as a CSV. So I'm going to choose Files. I'm going to upload my reconciliation demo CSV. I'll click to upload, click next, it uploads, and now you've got that data in OpenRefine, and we can now look to reconcile these companies with the OpenCorporates database. I'm now going to create a project. First, we need to choose the main column to reconcile against. Our API requires a company name as a minimum, so this is the column I'm now going to choose. So if we use the drop down by name, click on Reconcile and start reconciling. We then need to add the OpenCorporate service by adding Standard Service. and enter the endpoint for OpenCorporates Entity Resolution API, which is https opencorporates.com/reconcile. Now, while that's working, we are going to release a new reconciliation service soon, so please do check the documentation on api.opencorporates.com. Once done, you can map additional columns from the spreadsheet to additional parameters accepted by our API service. For this version of the reconciliation, you can provide a company name, jurisdiction code, and a date which the company was active. These additional parameters are not necessary, but it will help the service be more accurate. So I'm going to start by showing you without mapping the country code from our spreadsheet, or a date. So we're going to start the reconciliation process by clicking Start Reconciling. So this process was pretty quick, given that it was such a small spreadsheet, but it might take a bit of time depending on how many companies you have in your spreadsheet. You can see here that results are returned against each of my original records, and into the right in brackets is the reconciliation score, out of 100, indicating how well the company matches, in this case just by using the company name. If you hover over each of these, you'll see some information returned from OpenCorporates to give you more of an understanding of each of those matches. So you can now choose to either manually select one of the suggested results for each row, or if you have a lot of records, simply automatically accept the answer with the best score for each row. So I'm going to hover over this one, and you can see that the first one is from Delaware. And I've got a Massachusetts one here, and this one I've got Massachusetts. So I'm going to match this one here. Because as you can see, I've got quite a lot against this other result. And if I move down, there's many more for MSTS Inc. So I could choose each best match. And what I can do is I can drop down here to reconcile. I can go to actions, and I can match each cell to its best candidate. So now I have a list of 10 matched records with the best match as determined by OpenCorporates. But we've got some additional information here in terms of our country code and date that we think that it's active. So we're going to try a few more things now to help it be a little bit more intelligent. So I'm going to start by clearing off the reconciliation. Reconcile actions. I can just discard the judgments, but actually I'm going to clear the reconciliation data. Before I start reconciling again, I actually need to change or transpose my date column from text to date. This is pretty simple. You click down on the column, edit cells, common transformations, to date. And there it is in a date format. Pretty simple. Now I'm going to go back and start reconciling. So one thing I can do, if I knew, for example, that my data set was only a specific jurisdiction, instead of using the standard reconciliation URL that I showed you earlier, I can add the jurisdiction code to the end of this. So I can add GB, for example, for Great Britain. Or I can add USMT for Montana. Now, we use ISO 3166 alpha codes that we use in all company URLs. So for the US, Canada and France, for example, the country code is followed by the region state code, all in lowercase with country and region codes separated by an underscore. Because these are all in OpenCorporates URLs, you can easily search on the website under one of those jurisdictions and check the search parameters for the code you need. But what you can also do is you can add the whole of the US just by adding US here. Now in this list I've got multiple countries, so I'm going to continue just using the global search. Now I've already chosen the organisation to be the company name, but now I can add in the other two parameters that the reconciliation service takes. The first thing I'm going to do is add this country code as jurisdiction code. And I'm going to add date active to date. Now the date parameter is a date when the company was active or in existence. This is particularly useful as some jurisdictions only allow one company to exist in that one point in time with a particular name. And this helps prioritise companies that were active on the specified date. Make sure both are ticked. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start reconciling again. Now what I've actually got here is the new judgment and the new best candidate score, but I've also got the old ones in here. So I'm just going to remove these, which will give me my 10 back. And what you can do is you can change the ones where they've got just up to good scores to filter them just by using this. But what you can see is now I've got a much better map. Which if I go over here, I've got Massachusetts with the country code MA. Again, we've got Denmark in here, and as you go down. And what you can see here is actually MSTS Inc. is the best matched version here, which also matches Delaware, and Hercules Enterprises in US Texas comes up better here. But you do have a couple of different Texas enterprises that you could choose from. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to accept, for simplicity, I'm going to match each cell to its best candidate. But what I really want is to have this information in new columns. So I'm going to click on here, edit column, and I'm going to add a column based on this column. And the first thing I'm going to do is I want to actually see the match ID. So the first thing I could do is look for the OpenCorporates ID. And there's a really simple expression that you can put in here, which is opencorporates.com, and then the actual match ID, which is the jurisdiction number code and the company number. And I'm going to put this into OpenCorporates. Now you can see I've got my full URL, which I can link to. And I probably didn't say either, actually if I click on this also, that will take you to the straight URL. But actually what I want to do is get further information for that individual company. And because we have that link to the OpenCorporates unique ID, we can get further information by pulling back from the API. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to add a new column by fetching URLs. And what I'm going to do is use a very similar call and I'm basically going to call the API.opencorporates.com. I'm going to ask it to call the identifier, the unique identifier, and then, as you know, here's my API token that I'm adding in on the end. And you can see that this builds this text down here. And this will bring back the default JSON. So just to be really clear, I'm going to call that OpenCorporates JSON. Please do turn down the throttle delay so that this process completes in a reasonable time but doesn't overload the servers. So I'm going to change that to 200. Once done, click OK. and you will end up with a column full of the JSON data which we saw when we ran the API calls earlier. And this is just going to take a little bit of time to go. But this is basically what you saw before we turned it into XML in your web browser earlier. But what we really want to do is get some of the values out of that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add, again, a new column based on this column. And what I'm going to do is add a formula which will pass out the incorporation date. So if you can see through here as we go down, we've got lots of different information that we can pull out. And what we're looking for is to pull out from the results for the company the incorporation date. And so basically the column name is this here. And I'm going to call that incorporation. Okay. And there we go, I have incorporation date. And we can do that again with another one for another example. And this time I'm going to use current status. What you can see is I now have the current status for each of those where we have it. And you can do that by taking a look at any of the different details that you have down here. So there you have it, reconciling with OpenCorporates, using Refine to get matches, but also then accessing the API to extract additional information into your dataset. So hopefully now this all doesn't seem as scary as you might have thought it have done before. A few things from our website that will also be helpful when you use our API, other than the documentation on api.opencorporates.com. Browse all jurisdictions will take you to the registers page of all the company registers we have and show you the number of companies and officers. If you click on the register link, this gives you more information about the register, exclamation marks to note that there's a data quality note. This is a great starting point if you want to know the register of a certain country or jurisdiction. Even if we don't have the data, we have a link through to the registry. The Open Company Data Index score is part of our OCDI index, and this ranks countries in the world for how publicly accessible their corporate data is, and is a great resource for understanding what information you may be able to get to, whether through OpenCorporates or more widely. If we go back, you can click to the search for that particular jurisdiction just by clicking on that link, and that will also give you the jurisdiction code that we use. So finally, a few links to get you started. Find us at opencorporates.com or our API at api.opencorporates.com. Please apply for a public benefit API key and mention this presentation. That's available through the links as I showed you, or through this direct link here. The Investigator's Handbook, which is available on our blog or via Googling for OpenCorporates Investigator's Handbook, has a great amount of content and resources and tutorials, which we're planning to refresh and add to over the coming months. We'd love also to profile your stories. And then finally, reach out. Contact me for an upgrade to the enterprise account for your web searching, access to bulk data, or support with potential stories. I'm available at community@opencorporates.com. Thank you very much for listening.